So this is today. Today is yesterday, and tomorrow is also today.
You traveled through time to the present.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think you get how time travel works.
It's like we're stuck. You know, like a needle on a scratch record.
I wake up every day right here, right in Punxsutawney, and it's always February 2nd.
It's one of those infinite time loop situations you might have heard about.
It's a thing where the same day keeps happening.
Time.
Slow down! What are you, in a damn time loop or something?
Well, it's Groundhog Day again, and that must mean that I'm Professor Robert E.G. Black, and I'm here with Sean German from Groundhog Minute here to discuss Groundhog Day again.
It's Groundhog Day.
Always.
Again, always. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're, I don't even know how to start this conversation. We both talked about this so much.
We get to see the groundhog.
Yes. Well, does he pull him out the beginning? Didn't he pull him out the end of the last minute? Well, we're seeing him.
Yeah. Yep. He pulled him out last minute, but now we get to see the prognostication.
We'll see a lot of extras from Woodstock. This minute begins with them holding him up, and we hear Rita say, "Oh, isn't he cute?" Phil has his little, I can't do that with my mouth. He somehow folds his upper lip in and says, "You like your guys with prominent upper teeth?" But she plays along.
Mm-hmm. Big Phil's impersonation of groundhog noises. Little chatter.
Which Rita sort of does too.
Yeah.
She can't fold her lip up like him though. She just puts her teeth out.
Yeah, I can't really do that either. Yeah.
And she says no. And then we go to, Buster reading the proclamation. This February at 7:20 and 30 seconds, Punxsutawney Phil, the seer of seers, prognosticator of prognosticators, emerged reluctantly but alertly in Punxsutawney, PA, and stated in groundhogese, "I definitely see a shadow."
Boo.
Before we get to the crowd reaction.
Okay, sorry.
This is fun. We did get a crowd shot earlier, and I noticed that the awkward old guy from the auction is there.
Mm-hmm.
We did see him walking up behind Phil earlier, and he's there down in the front. We see the bearded guy who's lingering when Phil is sculpting his angel statue.
Yeah, with the Penn State hat.
Is in there down in the crowd. We can sort of see where the guy in the red hat is, the old guy from the diner.
Oh, yeah.
But in a lot of these shots, we can't really see him, but we can, knowing he's there, I know which person is like his shoulder, but he's behind someone in a couple of these shots here. But the thing I want to bring up is, speaking of prognosticators and, stated in groundhogese, Woodstock Willie has a beef right now with Mayor Mike Turner, who had his first time running the groundhog event in Woodstock, Illinois this year. And so he said, because he's new, he mistranslated, and Woodstock Willie didn't get his prediction wrong. He says there's subtle nuance. Woodstock Willie has put out at least 2 different public statements about the event and how he was translated wrong, saying there's a subtle nuance between "I see" and "I do not see" in groundhogese. So he's blaming the mayor, which is funny because, they have a scroll ready. There's no sense, especially in the movie. Is there a second scroll? No. It'd be funny if we could see they had just 2 scrolls ready and tried to play it off, but no, they're just reading something.
So you don't think they have 2 scrolls, depending on what?
I think they have 2 scrolls, but I don't think they bring both out there. They're not actually talking to a groundhog, Sean.
I know. Yeah. So I was going to say, do they have 2 scrolls depending on what the groundhog says? But I obviously stopped myself because the groundhog does not say anything. But so that means there's someone knows. See, that seems it introduces the possibility of cheating, because I imagine there's betting.
Well, yeah.
I mean, there's betting on everything.
Well, it's why you can't do official bets on things like the Oscars, is because the actual answers are out there.
Right.
It's not like a sporting event where no one knows who's going to win until the end. And so you can't make bets in Vegas. They do put out odds on them, but you can't bet on them. So you couldn't bet on this either. Although it'd be funny, just bet on which groundhog's going to be right.
I'm a little disappointed that you can't, because because then they would have to do 2 scrolls, one that he sees the shadow and one that he doesn't, and then maybe randomly pick, so that way the betting's fair.
I don't think in Woodstock they even had scrolls. I don't remember how they did it now.
Yeah, so and we get to see the complement of Punxsutawney officials on stage.
Mm-hmm. The inner circle.
Groundhog is being handled by the groundhog wrangler.
Yeah. Bill Hoffman.
Right.
Talked about him last minute. He's the guy who wrangles their groundhog for the film. I don't think he's involved with Groundhog Day stuff. Like he wasn't from Punxsutawney like the ice sculptor guy is.
Yeah, I think he's a Hollywood animal guy.
Mhm.
Like it was his groundhog.
Right.
He handles them because they do have very sharp teeth. They will bite.
Oh yeah.
That's Bill Murray.
Yeah, they bite. One of theirs bites. I guess officially this movie only used one, but I'm not sure how accurate that is. But it does bite Bill Murray later after he plays with a fake one. I'll have fun talking about that later.
This is kind of fun. This is like a fun minute. This is a stark contrast with, I think, the minutes that come before and after in terms of what we talked about from Ex Machina and then minute 15 from Eternal Sunshine.
Yeah.
They are both kind of more dark, serious, foreboding minutes. And this is just, it's fun. You know, the people are out, they're dancing, they get cold, they go by the fire, they warm up, they go dance again. And then, you know, we pull out this giant ground squirrel.
Is it fun and light, or is this the darker minute of the three this week? This is basically a microcosm of society. You have these rich inner circle guys in their fancy suits telling the plebes down below what weather is going to be like.
Right.
And they have to cheer.
They have to cheer.
It's not right.
No. Well, what if the poor groundhog he's
probably taking a nap in there, a little log.
Had nothing, and no option about this, no say.
No.
You know.
Then they pull him out and ask him, "What's the weather going to be like?"
Probably saying, "Put me down, let me go."
Yeah.
And these guys saying, "Oh, you didn't see a shadow," and the groundhog's like, "What are you talking about, shadow?" I'm saying, "Put me down." That's what I said.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you speak groundhogese at all.
Yeah, we need subtitles for this groundhog. He's like, "You want a weather prediction? It'll be a cold day in hell before I tell you the weather."
Yeah.
Put me back in my fake stump.
Yeah. So are groundhogs born with an innate ability for speech?
That's an excellent question. I mean, this one's been alive so long. Maybe he invented the language. I mean, he's 130 years old now.
Yeah.
Or more.
I mean, is it the same like groundhogese? Is it like English? I don't know. So the groundhogs in German. Could a German groundhog speak to an American groundhog, or is it like a difference between German and English?
Well, to be fair, it's Pennsylvania. He's also German.
Yeah.
And then outside Chicago, still pretty German. I don't know about the one in Jersey died, so maybe it's because he couldn't speak groundhogese well enough.
Yeah.
And the Canadian ones, I don't know.
It's groundhogese for call a doctor.
Yeah.
Or call a vet.
Whatever doctor they'll get him. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
He doesn't know the difference. They didn't program that knowledge in. We see some more crowd shots. The old guy with the walrus mustache is down on the bottom of one of those shots. We'll see him in the diner later. Mm-hmm. I did notice something new in this minute, which I love because I still can. Someone's sign in the crowd says, "I punk Chucks."
I just paused. I just have that up on my screen, and I hadn't seen that before.
Right, because he's not holding it up. It's like he's holding it down. So I hadn't seen that one when I looked for signs for my little Lego Gobbler's Knob. I looked around for good signs to copy. Yeah. I punk Chucks is weird.
Is it I, or is that a number one? Is he saying like number one punk chunk, like Punxsutawney chunk? I don't know.
Well, I feel like the punk is a play on Punxsutawney.
Chunks.
Chuck is he's not a woodchuck.
Woodchuck.
But I guess that's what they're going for.
Yeah.
Why would it be number one, though? In 92, when this is filmed, 91 when it's set, I don't think there were other groundhog festivals other than Punxsutawney.
So if you're the only, can you be number one?
Perhaps Punxsutawney Phil can also predict the future. Or that guy in the crowd can.
Oh, what do you mean, perhaps? You just mean he can predict.
That's his job.
Yeah. You're just saying he can predict futures other than the weather.
Right. That's what I meant. Okay. Yes. Yeah. That was implied.
Yeah.
He can predict the future aside from weather.
Yeah.
Maybe you should have predicted that guy was going to hold up the blizzard sign upside down. The script did. They did that on purpose, which is funny.
That is funny. I think I see Nancy. She's got a big pink coat. She's not too hard.
Nancy is not there. I figured out last minute it's someone else, but it seems like the same coat, and that might be on purpose. But she's wearing black gloves where Nancy has white gloves, and the hair is different.
Okay. So it's not Nancy.
But in that approximate spot, there is someone with a similar coat, which if that's on purpose, good job. Because clearly they weren't going to get Marita Garrity to just hang out there every time they filmed out here. Because who wants to do that? That's what extras are for.
Right.
See more of that classist stuff that we're seeing represented here on screen. Yeah.
Speaking of extras, according to Harold Ramis on the director's commentary on my disc, they were paying the extras $100 every hour to keep them standing out in the cold because it was really cold when they were filming this.
Yeah. In case there's any confusion on Sean's wording there, they weren't paying the 400 extras $100 an hour each. They had giveaways of $100 to kind of keep them happy and keep them excited and keep the energy up. I heard that at least one of the times they filmed out there, it ended up actually being warm, but that isn't in the commentary. And so people had to still wear their jackets and everything, even though it had gotten hotter. I think that maybe they did some reshoots of some shots or something. But yeah, what he talks about is it's cold and they just had to hang out there and act excited on cue, which is not always the easiest thing to do. As you can see, the guy behind Buster looks like he just woke up. Guy with the mustache.
That's why they call it acting.
Well, yeah, that one shot in the middle of Buster reading, they cut to the one shot of the crowd that's like a little closer. Those people all seem really glad to be in a closer shot. They seem happy and excited. Good job, extras. That one reporter holds up his mic to get the crowd reaction. That's good extra acting. He doesn't get any lines, so he's not getting paid more, but he stood out. So good for him.
There are no small parts.
Just small groundhogs.
Just small groundhogs.
The other thing in here is when it comes back to Phil talking again, in the movie, of course, the minute ends as he starts and he says, "On me in 3, 2, 1." Again, this is one time where television really fails to capture the true, we cut off, but true excitement of a large squirrel predicting the weather. Still in the final revision of the script, this is something that came out of the original, Ruben's original, is that the groundhog was supposed to get out of the handler's hands, run across the stage and jump off of the stage, which is why in minute 77, Phil tells Larry maybe they should set up a camera in a different spot. That's a leftover from that early thing, which as far as I know, they filmed some version of, because even in the final script, Phil says, "In just a moment, we will see the groundhog peek its head out of the hole here on Gobbler's Knob, look left, look right, step out of the hole, run around to this side, look at the crowd, burp, and run back into the ground." Or no, that's a specific line he said in the original, but they filmed something with Bill Murray. I mean, it's part of the art I use for this show is Bill Murray leaning down with his microphone to the groundhog. In order to get that still on the set, they had to at some point have put him near the groundhog for that shot, but they didn't use it in promotional material. So I assume they filmed a version of that scene. Maybe it just didn't work, or I don't know, it didn't serve its purpose well enough.
Yeah. They also learned a lot going to Punxsutawney and seeing the first pass through that Danny Rubin did. He didn't know,
right?
How this.
So they didn't know that someone grabs the groundhog
right.
and brings it out.
Yeah,
which changed that a bit. But then they still have that moment later where Phil tells Larry they should set up the camera somewhere else,
right?
Even though they don't then set up the camera somewhere else on the last day because he's still in the same spot doing his Chekhov speech. And I'll complain about the Chekhov speech when I get there.
Yeah, we all will. So speaking of time loops,
yes.
Most of life is just junk, right? It's filler. And then there's these moments when all the randomness turns into something perfect. It's like life's dropping all the bullshit just for a second to show us how amazing it could be all the time if it wanted to.
I don't know. I think maybe we're supposed to become like better people. Though I honestly don't even know how that could be possible.
Ever think about it? We must miss so many of them. All those tiny perfect things are just poof, gone, lost forever. But not today.
That is a disturbingly inspirational idea, Mark.
It's a perfect day. You couldn't have planned a day like this.
Well, you can. It just takes an awful lot of work.
Time.
The last revision is what counts, apparently.
What if we found them all? All the perfect things in this one town, in this one day. We could collect them.
Time loop of the week. It was almost going to be a bad movie of the week as well from what I had read about Blood Punch, but I kind of liked it.
I liked it very much.
Yeah. I was like, I know the lead too. I'm like, who is that guy? And it's because a year later he did Deathgasm, which is one of my favorite really dumb movies. Not a bad movie, but a dumb movie.
I mean, it got to the point where I kind of was having second thoughts. So when I picked it, I'd kind of forgotten from my first appearance that I needed to bring a time loop.
Yeah.
When I remembered, when you sent me your loop of the week. So I just brought up a list. I just went to the list of time loop movies. And I'm like, oh.
My list on IMDb.
Yeah. And then I'm like, oh, this is, here's one I haven't seen before. But I'm like, oh, it looks interesting. Not necessarily good, but interesting. So like I picked it.
Right.
Well, that one, my first recrimination was just, well, Robert Black sends me a 15-minute television show and I send back a 100-minute movie.
Right.
It's a lot more watching. It's a lot more work.
That's okay.
But then I started watching and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then this is good. And then this is really good. And then it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to talk about this because of spoilers. I think I just want to tell the listeners, if you have not seen Blood Punch, go watch it because I think it's really good.
Well, I think there is something we could tell them that isn't a spoiler.
Yeah.
Which is, in a way, it's kind of the opposite of Groundhog Day, or the opposite of what I've been calling a Connor's loop. A Connor's loop, the person has to become a better person to get out. Blood Punch is... they have to do bad things to get out.
You got to be a worse person.
Then they have to figure out which bad things are the ones that will work, which is hilarious at a certain point in that movie. It's like, well, who do we have to kill to escape a time loop?
Yeah.
But it's not science fiction where they're trying to they don't know what caused it. It just happened. Well, no, that's not true. I apologize. They explain it in a really bad, seems like it's an 80s movie kind of way because it's Native American curse.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, it kind of, I mean, I don't know if it influenced or just predicted or it's coincidence, but some of the elements that end up becoming part of Happy Death Day and also, was it Russian Doll?
Yeah.
You've got multiple people in a loop, so it's different from Groundhog Day. You've got some things that are not affected by the loop. Some things are reset and other things are not. So, that's something we saw in Happy Death Day. A tree is like, slowly feeling the effects of physical injury, if she dies. And that's another thing. It's different if you die during the loop. Your next iteration of the same day is different from people who do not die during the loop. Yeah, so I hadn't seen the film. I just kind of picked it almost at random from a list of time loop movies. And I ended up enjoying it very much. And would recommend it to the audience, particularly if you're interested. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably interested in the kind of things that would make you enjoy this film, I think. Very interesting take. I mean, some similar things in terms of, you realize you're in a loop and then you kind of need to decide, are you okay with this loop or not? And then eventually, I think everyone eventually decides, well, this fun is fun, but we need to get out of the loop. And then you've got to figure out, all right, how do you do that? And it seems, and certain that is knowing why. You got to know why you're in the loop because that's going to help you figure out how you get out.
Yeah. And I wish I had watched Blood Punch before you brought it up because my time loop of the week this week would have been a different thing. Instead of an episode of Children's Hospital, which I'll talk about in a moment, it would have been an episode of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, because in that episode, it's called Twas the Night Before Myxymas, because I can't say his name. That's part of the point. The weird little imp guy, Myxoplex. Is that it? I always feel like I forgot a syllable when I say his name.
I think it's When I was younger, I had like it was like a comic book on record. It was like a 45.
So someone had to say
with a short Superman story. So I heard it. Yeah, I think it was Myxoplex.
Yeah, well, he creates a time loop there. And the thing is, as it goes along, it's kind of like what you said with Happy Death Day, where injuries sort of have kind of an echo in the next resumption. Yeah. And eventually extra people start remembering that time is repeating. And by the end, multiple characters all know that they're in a time loop. And so they can work together to get out of it. And so it's a different kind of loop. It's not the Connor's loop where you have to do better as yourself in order to get out, which Happy Death Day is both. Because, she definitely has to be a better person in order to survive, but she also has to figure out what to do, which could have been done better and turns into science fiction for the sequel. That's a whole other thing. We are not talking about Happy Death Day today.
Well, so speaking of Happy Death Day, if there was a sequel to Blood Punch, I would watch it.
Yeah.
You've talked about it. We talked about it on Groundhog Minute at groundhogminute.com, that at least in one version of the script for Groundhog Day, it was going to be followed up with Rita being in a loop.
Yeah, that's the end of the original script, is that she's now mad at Phil because she has to wake up in bed with him every day.
Blood Punch kind of ends with, well, they're not in a loop, but there's a very strong suggestion that another loop is about to begin.
Yeah. Also, Blood Punch, I'll have to watch it again. It'll come up on a later episode. Another time loop movie, Repeaters, is very similar in its setup, is that it's about drug addicts and how their lives are always getting that. They need to just get that next fix and that's it. But then the next day is the same. They have to do it again. And the beginning of this movie, that's actually, I think, one of the worst parts of it is because when I first started watching, I'm like, I think you liked my comment on Facebook about I didn't buy any of these people as meth addicts. And I was starting to comment on it like I would a bad movie where I'm just like live Facebook commenting. But then it got good once they were in the cabin. And I'm like, maybe we didn't need that part at the beginning of the movie. Maybe we didn't need the drugs at all. I'm like, what is this movie? It felt like there was too much going on, and it could have been I liked it, but I think it would have been even better if it were a short film. Like 3 people in a cabin, and like the boyfriend is abusive, and so they kill him, but then the next day it happens again. And then it could have turned into more of like a Connor's loop where they're not supposed to kill him, but the problem is they can't get out of killing him. When they try to talk to him, it doesn't work.
I do agree the setup.
Spoiler.
I think it's
also 44 minutes before there's a time loop.
Before they get into loop. Yeah, I think that's a little bit long. And they're Hollywood meth addicts. And not even,
It's like all you gotta do to play a meth addict is just shake a little.
Yeah.
That's all.
There's like, and it's not a spoiler. It's kind of the opening scene, the beginning of the film it's rehab. It's a, group therapy setting. It's a circle of people talking about their addiction. And there's way too many teeth in that circle for it to really be meth addicts, but
And I've already picked my time loop for next week. So maybe I'll bring up repeaters in a couple weeks to talk about that one. Cause that is the one that does a very good use of drug addiction as the metaphor for the time loop.
Yeah. For Blood Punch, I would say a short film, or take a half hour out of that opening bit, get to the loop a little bit quicker, and then add a half hour to the end of what happens.
Yeah.
Kind of what happens after the loop.
Or add a couple more characters for that middle so you can pad out like a big problem with movies. It's a very cheap setting for horror films, especially to rent a cabin.
Yeah.
But then in order to make it interesting, you need to give us people in a cabin. And we get meth addicts who want to make meth in the cabin. And that's not that interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird.
Well,
Whereas people up in a cabin and it ends badly, that's horror film fodder. Easy.
Yeah. And for much of it, you've got 3 characters
and for most of the movie.
And most of it, one of them's dead. So there's a lot of time where there's only 2 characters.
Right.
So if you brought more people, and that might be an interesting twist if, people could get drawn into the loop, sort of innocent bystanders or not so innocent, kind of get sucked in. And then it becomes, it's like a Mozart opera where you keep adding voices.
It's a great thing they play with in the movie is that if you die in the time loop, the next day you don't remember that time through. And so when you die, it kind of resets back to the beginning, but you don't know it. But if you're the one who lives, you get to repeat that day. I think their montage was actually more entertaining than the Happy Death Day to You one of all her suicides. A couple of her suicides are hilarious, but I think their montage of they're like having breakfast. Oh, he's up. Better shoot him.
Yeah.
It's like so casual when they were so worried about having to kill someone at the beginning of the movie, and then they're just doing it casually.
Well, and then the sort of the hunting cabin motif comes into play because it's, of course, since they're
there's weapons.
They've got guns, but then there's bear traps, there's arrows, there's hatchets, there's all kinds of fun stuff. So we get to see the many exciting deaths. Yeah, so Blood Punch, really interesting.
That one's pretty good. And then my time loop of the week was an episode of Children's Hospital, which is generally a 15-minute show, including credits. I think this one is like 11 minutes long, so it's even shorter than the average. This is season 5, episode 3, I believe.
The C word.
The C word. In which this season, sort of inexplicably, the hospital is now in a war zone.
It's like a MASH unit.
Yeah. And they keep sort of explaining it, but it never makes sense.
I mean, I kind of just let it go. I'm not a regular viewer of Children's Hospital, but I'd seen a handful of episodes. So I'm like, okay, maybe there's just a season where it's an Army hospital all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Army Children's Hospital.
It was just that season. Yes. I'd seen like every episode up until this season. And then I kind of lost track of it because it's on I didn't have cable and I didn't have a DVR catching it. Apparently it's gone on for a few more years past this. And I'm like, cool, I got to find those because it's on Hulu. But the C word is one of the main characters, Owen, thinks he's in a time loop. I'll just spoil this one because it's short. It doesn't matter. It's a joke. He thinks he's in a time loop because he wakes up in the morning and what's her name? Kat comes in from working the night shift and she says, oh, it was brutal. And the thing is, that's what she does every morning as he wakes up, is her coming in from the night shift saying it's brutal.
Well, and then they're playing, I guess, was it taps? There's like a trumpet.
Reveille.
A reveille. Yeah, there's a trumpet playing reveille, which if you're on an Army base, I guess they do every morning.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, they're playing that song again. He doesn't realize, it's an Army base. They're going to play it every day.
Yeah. When it took me like a little while to figure out, it wasn't a time loop. It's just the same thing happens every day.
Right. Because then Blake, who people would know, Rob Corddry, is jogging and goes into some wet cement and then crashes into a plate of glass that 2 guys are carrying. It's really cartoonish. And then the next day, because he broke the glass the previous day, they still have to replace that glass. So they're walking by again with the same thing. But Owen walks away before he sees, he warns him away from the glass, like, don't walk into that. And then after Owen leaves, we hear Blake be like, yeah, I'm not going to have that happen 2 days in a row. So we know he's not in a time loop.
It's not in a loop.
But the whole main part of the story is they're going to have this like big musical event. What do they call those?
Yeah, review.
I'm trying to think of the military organization.
USO.
Or USO kind of show. And they were going to have holograms. It was very much of its time when this episode happened in 2013. They were going to have holograms of a bunch of stars, but the plane with the holograms crashed or was shot down. And then later, a plane that was bringing pizza is also shot down, which is funny. So they have one artist, and Owen volunteers to play the trumpet because he thinks he has a lifetime to learn it because he's in a time loop, which also doesn't make sense in a time loop because you can't volunteer today because they won't know you volunteered.
Right.
You just go learn the trumpet. But he volunteers assuming he'll just be able to play when the time comes, except the time comes that same day and he's not prepared. And that's basically it. I mean, it's 11 minutes. There's some side stories with the holograms, and the title refers to the musical act they have is kind of a Justin Bieber stand-in, and his name is McKeever, but he goes by the C word. And then they get McKeever fever, but it turns out it has nothing to do with him. It's just coincidence that there's a very contagious fever infecting people while he's there.
Yeah.
That's Children's Hospital in a nutshell, really. Is weird non sequitur humor.
But I found it very interesting because it tied into, I think, one of the reasons for my great interest in Groundhog Day, and one of the things I believed and talked about during my podcast, Groundhog Minute at groundhogminute.com, was a very literal, real interpretation of the film that you can live a real Groundhog Day where you do the same thing day after day after day, and, every day in the same place, and nothing really matters, your own Gus. And so when it turns out like that, they're not in a time loop,
right?
They just do the same thing every day. I'm like, that's what I'm saying.
And that will happen if you're working a hospital and doing like night shifts or where they're sleeping in a bed at the hospital because their shifts have very small gaps, and you'll get into a sort of sleepwalking mode.
Right.
They tested that on Mythbusters on a fishing vessel where you can actually do better work if you have intermittent sleep, because it's this weird work where you're not judging your actions anymore. You're just doing them. But then it will drift into a bad version of it at a certain point. But there's this sweet spot for that kind of work where it's repetitive, where they actually got better at it. And so, her coming in saying the night shift is brutal, it's going to be the same every night because she's working the night shift. So, and the great line was it says, after a few more months of today's, I'll be ready for today's big show. Written by Diablo Cody, by the way, if anyone is a fan of hers.
Yeah.
I think she wrote a few episodes that season. And you just said where people can find you, but if you want to remind them of the website as well.
Yeah, I did a similar podcast where I talked about the movie Groundhog Day, 1 minute at a time. Imagine that. At groundhogminute.com, and all my podcast stuff, my current and previous podcasts, as well as my guest appearances, I link to from my main site, which is catandshawn.org, O-R-G, because I'm organized. Not really.
Thank you for listening. We're all organized. Well, we have to be for this format. The Groundhog Day Project Minute by Minute is just one part of an existential trilogy of podcasts. Tune in every Tuesday for Minutia Ex Machina, every Wednesday for more Groundhog Day, and every Thursday for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Minute. Follow this show on Twitter at Groundhog Day MXM, no offense to Groundhog Minute, and on Instagram and Facebook at Groundhog Day Project. This has been a production of Lemming Drops Studio. You can find links to this and more at lemmingdrops.com or join the Facebook group Lemming Drops Studio Tour. And you can support all my shows at patreon.com/lemmingdrops. Until next time.
First, I played the game by the rules from 1 to 10. Then you took me round again.
I think I have traveled through time.
What is wrong in the end which never comes? Or which comes again and again, laughing, like waves.
Since the Big Bang set everything in motion, everything that happens in this universe has to be the way it is.
Man, are you hungry? I haven't eaten since later this afternoon.
Particles unfolding the way they're destined to.
How do you sleep at night? You've never seen Groundhog Day?
Yeah, Groundhog Day is not a documentary.